Bruce Lee was training 200 kids when cocky black belt mocked him, 5 seconds later shocked. Bruce Lee and the challenge of the arrogant black belt. Bruce Lee's dojo in Los Angeles was packed that summer afternoon. 200 students, including children and teenagers, trained under his watchful eye, repeating sequences of kicks and punches with the precision that only years of discipline could shape. The air smelled of sweat and determination, and the sound of kiais echoed off the wooden walls. It was then that the door opened with a bang. A tall, muscular man wearing an impeccable GI and a faded black belt walked in as if he owned the place. His dark eyes roamed the room with disdain, stopping at Bruce, who observed everything in silence, arms crossed. "So this is where the great Bruce Lee teaches?" said the newcomer, his voice full of sarcasm. "I heard you're fast. But speed without strength is worthless." The students stopped, confused. Some whispered among themselves. Bruce, however, didn't move. He just tilted his head slightly, as if assessing a problem student. "You must be new here," said Bruce, calmly. "Why don't you join us? Learning never hurts." The man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Learn? I have a 5th-degree black belt in Taekwondo. I came here to see if the legends about you are true." He flexed his fingers, cracking the knuckles. "But I think I'll show you how it's really done." A murmur ran through the dojo. The younger children flinched, some even backed away. Bruce, however, remained impassive. "If you insist," he said, taking a step forward. "But remember, true martial art is not about humiliating, but about growing." The man snorted. "Enough talk." Before anyone could blink, he charged forward, a spinning kick flying towards Bruce's head. It was a fast, powerful movement, worthy of an experienced fighter. But Bruce was no longer there. In a blur, he dodged to the side, his opponent's foot passing inches from his face. Before the man could recover, Bruce spun around and, with an almost imperceptible movement, delivered a 1-inch punch to his opponent's chest. The impact was dry. The man flew backwards as if he had been hit by a hammer, sliding across the mat until he hit the wall. Her eyes widened, mouth open in a wordless scream. For 5 seconds, he lay there, motionless, trying to understand what had happened. Then, slowly, he fell to his knees, his breathing ragged. The dojo was silent. Bruce approached, offering his hand. The man, still dazed, looked at him, his wounded pride fighting reality. "How?" he managed to stammer. "Strength comes from technique, not ego," said Bruce, helping him to stand up. "You have potential, but you need to learn to listen." The man lowered his head, embarrassed. When he looked up again, something had changed in them. I would like to train here," he said, his voice hoarse. "If you accept me." Bruce smiled. "Everyone is welcome. But remember, here, we don't fight against others. We fight against our own limitations." The man nodded, bowing in respect. The students applauded, relieved and inspired. And so, on that day, Bruce Lee not only defended his reputation, but turned a challenge into a lesson, and an enemy into a disciple. Training continued. And, as always, the true victory was not in winning, but in making the other person see beyond their own arrogance. The Way of the Dragon. The following days were of strict discipline. The new student, who introduced himself as Li Wei, arrived before dawn for the first training session, his knuckles still scarred from the previous fight. Bruce watched him in silence as he stretched, his movements stiff, his breathing ragged with tension. It wasn't just the body that needed shaping, it was the mind. "Breathing," Bruce said, approaching. "You hold your breath as if you were expecting a blow. Let go." Li Wei tried, but his shoulders remained tense. "It's not just the air. It's fear. You still think you're proving something." The man gritted his teeth. "I'm not afraid." Bruce smiled, almost imperceptibly. "Then why have your fists been clenched since you came in here?" Li Wei looked at his hands in surprise. He relaxed them slowly, but doubt remained in his eyes. The training was unlike anything Li Wei had ever known. There were no competitions, no rankings, no shouts of encouragement to crush your opponent. Instead, Bruce would make them practice the same movement for hours, until their body performed it without thinking. The technique is not a trick. It is an extension of you, he repeated. And when someone made a mistake, there was no scolding, just one question: where did you go wrong? Li Wei hated this. On the third day, it exploded. This isn't a fight, he shouted, throwing his gloves on the floor. Spending hours repeating a kick like a robot? I came here to learn how to win, not to become a dancer. The other students moved away, accustomed to the outbreaks of newcomers. Bruce, however, didn't move. Do you think winning is knocking someone down? He asked, calmly. Then knock me down. Li Wei rushed forward without hesitation, throwing a straight punch. Bruce dodged it with minimal movement, as if the blow didn't even exist. Another attack, another dodge. And then, without Li Wei noticing, Bruce pinned him against the wall, his forearm lightly pressing his throat. You're dead, Bruce said, releasing him. 3 times in a row. Li Wei gasped, his eyes burning with humiliation. I didn't see you move. Exactly. Bruce picked up the gloves from the floor and held them out. You weren't fighting. It was charging like a blind bull. And bulls are easy to dodge. The turning point came on the 7th day. Bruce led them outside the dojo, to an empty park in the evening light. There were no mats, no rules, just the wind and the dirt. Today, you will fight without technique, he announced. No rehearsed blows. Just instinct. Li Wei frowned. Like this? Forget everything you learned here. Bruce took off his shirt, revealing the scars from years of training. Fight like your life depends on it. The students looked at each other, confused. But when Bruce gestured for them to begin, Li Wei didn't hesitate. He attacked with fury, mixing punches, kicks, and even a clumsy trip. Bruce blocked, counterattacked, but this time didn't take him down. Instead, he let Li Wei tire. And then, when the man was already panting, Bruce changed. His movements became fluid, almost lazy, but each touch was precise. A push here, an imbalance there. Li Wei tried to fight back, but his blows went wide, as if Bruce anticipated each movement. Within minutes, he was on the ground, exhausted, looking up at the sky as Bruce crouched beside him. Now you understand, Bruce said, offering his hand. Technique is important. But without presence, it is worthless. Li Wei held his hand but didn't get up immediately. He stayed there, feeling the weight of his own body, his slow breathing returning. I always thought I needed to be stronger than others, he murmured. But you're not the strongest. Not the fastest. Bruce laughed. And yet, here you are. Weeks passed, and Li Wei transformed. Not a perfect fighter, he still made mistakes, he still lost control sometimes. But something in him had broken and reformed. One day, after a particularly strenuous session, Bruce found him sitting on the steps of the dojo, looking at his hands. You're quiet today, Bruce commented. Li Wei shrugged. I was thinking. Before, I only saw opponents. Now, I see people. Bruce nodded, as if he had expected this. And what changed? I stopped fighting them. Li Wei looked up. I started fighting with them. Bruce smiled, satisfied. Now you are ready. Years later, when Li Wei was asked about his master, he always answered the same thing. Bruce Lee didn't teach me how to win. He taught me not to need to win. And when the dojo was closed, because Bruce moved on to new challenges, because the world called him to other battles, Li Wei didn't cry. Instead, he carved out his own space. Not to teach techniques, but to show people that true strength is not in breaking others, but in not letting yourself be broken. And so, the dragon's lesson lived on. Not in one man, but in many. Dragon's inheritance. Li Wei's dojo had no name. It didn't need to. The dark wooden walls, worn by time, kept the echo of Bruce Lee's footsteps, and that was enough. At first, students arrived expecting to find a stern master, someone who would teach them how to take down opponents with precise blows. But Li Wei did not welcome them with shows of strength. Instead, he sat cross-legged in the center of the mat and waited. "Why did you come?" he asked, looking each one in the eye. The answers varied. "I want to learn to fight, I need to defend myself, I want to be strong like you." Li Wei listened silently, then slowly shook his head. "Then you've already started wrong." The first months were dedicated to a single lesson, breathing. Not the superficial breathing of the lungs, but the one that comes from the womb, slow, deep, capable of calming the mind even when the body trembles. The students complained. "This isn't a fight," they said. "When are we going to learn the moves?" Li Wei just smiled and pointed to the mirror on the wall. "Look at yourself. What do you see?" They saw tense muscles, anxious looks, clenched fists. He saw fear. "The fight starts long before the first punch is thrown," he said. "It starts when you decide whether to let fear guide your hands." Asterisk. One of the first students to understand was Mei Lin, a 17-year-old girl who had arrived at the dojo with bruised wrists. Her father, a violent man, had beaten her since she was a child, and she wanted to learn how to fight back. Li Wei didn't teach her how to block blows. Instead, he asked her to close her eyes and describe the sound of her father's voice. "It's thick," she said, after a long silence. "Like thunder." "And what does your voice sound like when he yells at you?" Mei Lin hesitated. "I don't know." "Exactly." Li Wei touched his own chest. "As long as you don't know the sound of your own voice, you'll continue to hear only his." Over time, Mei Lin stopped shaking when her father approached. Not because she had learned to fight, but because she had found something stronger than fear, the certainty that she didn't need to be defined by it. One day, upon returning home, he found his father drunk and staggering. He raised his hand to hit her, but stopped mid-gesture, surprised. Mei Lin didn't flinch. She just looked at him, calmly, and said, "If you hit me, I'll leave. And I'm not going back." The father lowered his arm. He never touched her again. Asterisk. Another notable student was Chen, a former soldier who carried the weight of a war he didn't understand. He arrived at the dojo with his fists always ready, as if the entire world were an enemy. Li Wei didn't correct him. "I let him punch the sandbag until his hands bled, until the sweat ran down his face in rivers. Then, when Chen was exhausted, he would sit next to him and say, 'You think anger is your ally. But it is like a double-edged sword, it cuts the one who holds it as much as it cuts the enemy.'" Chen laughed bitterly. "And what do I do with it, then? Burial? No. You transform her." Li Wei took him outside the dojo, to an open field where the wind was blowing strong. He handed him a sheet of paper and a brush. "Write your anger." Chen hesitated, then dipped his brush into the ink and traced angry characters on the paper. When he finished, Li Wei took the sheet and burned it. "Now she is no longer yours. It's gray." Chen wanted to protest, but the words died in his throat. For the first time in years, he felt something loosen inside him. Asterisk. Years passed. Li Wei's dojo was filled with voices, with bodies that learned to fall and get up without breaking. Some students left, frustrated at not finding what they expected there. Others stayed, and these were the ones who understood. They were not there to learn how to win, but to discover that the true victory was not about the other, but about the part of them that still believed they needed to win. One day, a young man named Kai entered the dojo. He had a hard look, his knuckles were bruised from street fights. When Li Wei asked why he had come, he replied dismissively, I want to learn how to break bones. Li Wei was unfazed. He just nodded and said. Then start by breaking yours. Kai frowned. What? You heard. And so, Kai spent weeks without lifting a finger against anyone. Instead, he learned to feel every muscle, every joint, to understand the limits of his own body. One day, during training, he fell to his knees on the mat, exhausted. Li Wei walked over and stretched out his hand. Now you know what it's like to break. And you know it hurts. Kai looked at him, confused. Then, for the first time, he laughed. Is this some kind of trick? No. It's the truth. Li Wei helped him to get up. If you break someone, you will carry the weight of it forever. But if you learn not to let yourself be broken, no one will ever have power over you. Kai stayed. And, over time, he became one of the most dedicated students, not because he had learned to fight better, but because he had discovered that strength was not in destroying, but in remaining whole. Asterisk. When Li Wei already had gray hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes, a man entered the dojo. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and had a scar on his face that ran from his temple to his chin. He recognized Li Wei immediately. You are Bruce Lee's student, he said, his voice hoarse. Li Wei watched him calmly. And you are the man he could never beat. The visitor smiled, a joyless smile. Yes. And now I'm here to challenge you. The student stirred, ready to intervene. But Li Wei raised his hand, asking for silence. Why? Because I want to prove that his philosophy doesn't work. In the end, what matters is who is left standing. Li Wei nodded, as if he had expected this. Then fight me. The man was surprised. I expected resistance, arguments. But Li Wei just took off his shoes and got on the mat. The visitor did the same, his fists raised. No rules, he warned. As you wish. The man attacked first, a quick punch, straight to the face. Li Wei dodged it with a minimal, almost lazy movement. The second blow came next, a sweep. Li Wei jumped, lightly, as if dancing. The visitor growled and attacked, the blows following one another in a storm of punches and kicks. Li Wei did not fight back. He just moved, dodged, absorbed the other's energy without letting it touch him. After long minutes, the man stopped, panting. He was sweaty, his arms were shaking with exhaustion. Why don't you fight back? He grunted. Li Wei took a deep breath. Because you are not my enemy. Then why did you agree to fight? To show that you don't need to win. Li Wei stretched out his hand. And neither do I. The man looked at the outstretched hand, then at Li Wei's serene face. Something broke inside him. He lowered his fists, slowly. Bruce was right, he murmured. You learned. Li Wei smiled. No. I just stopped needing to prove it. Asterisk. Over time, Li Wei's dojo became more than a training place. It was a refuge, a space where people arrived broken and left whole. He never charged for his classes. The lesson is priceless, he said. And neither does the cure. When he died, there was no grand ceremony. His students gathered at the dojo as usual and sat in silence. There were no words that could summarize what he had taught. Then, one by one, they began to move. Not in blows, not in defense, but in fluidity, like water following the course of a river. And so, the dragon's lesson continued. Not in one man, but in many. Not in one place, but in all the places where someone chose not to fight the world, but with it. The dragon's last lesson. The years have softened the rough edges of Li Wei's dojo. The wooden walls, once marred by blows and sweat, now bore honorable scars, like the veins of an ancient tree. The smell of incense and sandalwood oil mixed with the aroma of green tea, served in small cracked porcelain cups, inherited from a student who had brought them back from a trip to the south. Each crack told a story, a fall, a new beginning, a hand outstretched at just the right moment. Among the students, there were those who arrived out of necessity and stayed by choice. Like Mei Lin, the young woman who entered the dojo with her fists clenched and her eyes full of tears, after being thrown out of her home for refusing to marry a man she didn't love. Li Wei did not teach her to fight her father, but to understand that her anger was a river that, if dammed, would drown her. Over time, she learned to let it flow, channeling her strength into something greater. Years later, she was the one who held the hand of another girl, a newcomer, shaking with fear and shame, and whispered, "Here, you don't have to be strong. You just have to be." There was also Old Shin, a former soldier who carried the weight of battles that no one remembered anymore. He arrived at the dojo limping, his right leg stiff as iron, and he refused to speak. Li Wei didn't pressure him. He just sat next to her in the garden, watching the carp swim in the lake, and said, "The body keeps memories that the mouth cannot release. But it also knows how to forget, if you let it." For months, Chin just attended classes, his fingers clenched on the handle of a cane that he never let go of. Until, one day, without warning, he released her. And when he finally moved, it was with the slowness of someone relearning to trust their own weight. The dojo grew, but not like other training places, where masters demanded respect through fear or rigid hierarchy. There, respect was born from shared silence, from the looks that met each other when someone stumbled and were supported before they even fell. Li Wei never raised his voice. When a student made a mistake, he simply adjusted his posture with a light touch on the shoulder, as if to say, "Try again." This time, with less force and more presence. But not everything was peace. There was a time when the dojo was almost closed. A man named Kong, a master from a rival school, arrived in town intent on proving his methods were superior. He publicly challenged Li Wei, certain that his technique, based on brute strength and military discipline, would defeat the dojo's soft approach. The news spread, and many came to watch the confrontation, expecting blood or, at the very least, a show of power. On the appointed day, Kong arrived with his disciples, all dressed in black uniforms, postures rigid like statues. Li Wei, as always, was barefoot, his hands folded over his worn obi. He didn't move when Kong advanced, nor when the first blow was struck, a direct punch, charged with all the anger the man had built up from years of training without recognition. Li Wei dodged with minimal movement, as if the air around him had become denser. Kong attacked again, and again, each blow more furious than the last. But the more he fought, the more it seemed his fists found only emptiness. Until, exhausted, he stopped, panting, his eyes burning with humiliation. "This isn't a fight," he growled. "It's cowardice." Li Wei tilted his head. "You came here to win. I'm here to teach." Kong spat on the ground. "Teach this to your students. They'll need it when I return with my men to destroy this place." Kang's disciples laughed, but none of Li Wei's students moved. They had learned that true strength was not in destroying, but in persisting. And persisting sometimes meant waiting. Kong did not return the next day. Not in the other. A week later, one of his disciples appeared at the dojo, alone, with a black eye and his head bowed. He asked to train. Li Wei accepted. Over time, others came. Some out of curiosity, others out of necessity. The dojo didn't just survive, it expanded, like roots finding their way through rocks. Asterisk. Li Wei died one autumn morning, just as the leaves on the trees in the garden were beginning to turn yellow. He was sitting in the same place as always, facing the lake, his hands resting on his knees. His last student, a boy named Tao, found him like this, serene, as if he had fallen asleep during meditation. There was no pain, there was no struggle. Just a long exhale, as if he had finally let go of something he had been carrying for a long time. The students gathered, as he had predicted. There was no loud crying, no wailing. Just the sound of the wind in the trees and, after a while, the soft creaking of the floorboards as they moved together, in a flow that was neither dancing nor fighting, but something in between. Mei Lin was the first to get up, following the rhythm she felt in her own body. Then, Chen, without a cane, his movements still hesitant but firm. Tao, the boy, watched for a moment before joining in, imitating the others with the seriousness of someone learning a new language. They moved like this for hours, until the sun began to set, dyeing the dojo golden. There was no choreography, no master to guide them. Just the memory of the body, the memory of a presence that no longer needed to be there to be felt. As night fell, they sat in a circle, as they did after each practice. Someone lit a candle. Nobody spoke. But at some point, Tao broke the silence. "What do we do now?" Mei Lin smiled. "What we always did. We continue." And so it was. The dojo did not close. The older students took Li Wei's place, not as masters, but as guardians of a space that no longer belonged to anyone, and, at the same time, belonged to everyone. Some left, taking what they had learned with them to other places. Others stayed, teaching not just techniques, but what it meant to be whole in a world that insisted on breaking people. Years later, when Li Wei's students were asked about his legacy, they responded with stories. About the woman who learned to forgive her husband after years of silence. About the man who, after losing an arm in an accident, discovered he could still move with grace. About the boy who, when he fell, didn't cry, but got up before he even realized he had hurt himself. And sometimes, when the wind blew hard across the mountains, some swore they heard the sound of deep breathing, as if the air itself carried an ancient lesson. It wasn't a ghost. It was just the memory of a man who had taught others that true strength lies not in winning, but in knowing when to stop fighting. And so the dragon remained alive. Not in a single body, but in each gesture that chose to flow instead of resist. Not in a single place, but in every space where someone decided that healing was worth more than victory.